Very good afternoon to all attendees. Trust all of you are keeping well and staying safe wherever you are. Welcome to MDEC webinar series titled COVID-19 Dissecting Malaysia's Economic Stimulus Response for the Digital Economy. Let me start with the housekeeping rules. First of all, this webinar is being recorded and is scheduled to last for 1 hour, including Q&A. As we have a huge number of participants today, the participant in Zoom will be in listen and view only mode during the webinar. If you would like to ask a question during the session, please type your questions on the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen right at the bottom. And also happy to inform you that we're broadcasting live through YouTube channel due to the overwhelming response and request for additional online platform access. We will endeavor to ask as many questions as we can during this Q&A session. A recording of this webinar will be made available on MDEC's YouTube and LinkedIn platforms. Please follow @MyMDEC on Twitter and YouTube, as well as Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation on LinkedIn. Please refer to the webinar recording to access the slides presented during this webinar itself. Now, as a background of this webinar, the recently announced economic stimulus package, Prihatin and Prihatin Plus for SMEs are put in place to protect the people, to support business, and to strengthen economy. This 1 hour interactive webinar will uncover what's in the stimulus package and how it may benefit the digital tech and global business services companies from the perspective of tax, wage subsidy, and labor law. So we have lined up 3 esteemed panel speakers. First of all is Ms. Sim Kwang Gek, who is the Managing Director and Country Tax Leader of Deloitte Malaysia. Ms. Tam Lee Jun is the Executive Director and Grant and Incentives Tax Leader of Deloitte Malaysia as well. And we also have Mr. Caesar Long, the Managing Partner himself of Raslan Long, Shen and Yao. I will let them introduce themselves briefly when they start the session, but they don't need much of introduction being leaders in their own respective field. Me, Hugh Wee Chung, is the Vice President and Investment Development of MDEC, is your moderator of this webinar today. So how shall we flow this webinar? We'll start off with presentation from Deloitte Malaysia team and followed by sharing session by Mr. Caesar Long, followed by Q&A session. So we start off with Ms. Sim, who will start the presentation by dissecting the stimulus package, focusing on different forms of taxes, how would this help companies from cash flow perspective, and what can be deferred, who is entitled. And she will try to answer as many questions as possible that she has actually received from other sessions that she has been through so far. Over to you, Ms. Sim.
Thank you, Mr. Hugh. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope you are keeping well and safe at home. So I would be covering the key tax measures announced by the Inland Revenue Board, IRB for short, due to COVID-19. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, right. So this slide here, this is one measure that allows companies to revise their tax estimate in the 3rd installment month. Now, for those who do not understand what tax estimate is, it is actually the amount of tax you estimate for a financial year, and then you pay a 12 monthly tax installment payments based on that estimate. So for example, if you are a company with a 31st December 2020 year end, you submit your tax estimate 1 year before, which is by 30th November 2019, and then you begin your first installment payment in the month of February 2020. Now, typically, a company can then revise the tax estimate in the 6th month or in the 9th month, upwards or downwards. If it's downwards, then of course, you pay lesser installment thereafter. Now, due to COVID-19, the government is aware that businesses would be impacted, and therefore they are giving the opportunity for companies to revise the tax estimate in the 3rd installment month instead of waiting until 6 months. So effectively here, you save 2 months of tax installments, all right? So this slide here, it shows you the various year ends as well as when the third installment month is due. So depending on your financial year end, you would be able to revise your tax estimate in the third installment month. So example here, if there's a company here with a December year end, right, 12/20, so December 2020 year end, the third installment month here is due on 15 April. So then this company will be able to submit the revision in April, which is actually now, okay? Now do take note here, this flexibility is given only for cases where the third installment month falls in year 2020. So in this slide here, you can see if, for example, the company, the last column there, have a financial year ending 30th September 2021, would not be able to enjoy this benefit. Why? Because the third installment month falls on January 2021. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? Okay, deferment of tax installment payments. It is, you can defer your tax installment payments for 6 months. That's for tourism industry, should not apply to most of you who are tech companies. But if you are non-tourism, there's another one which you can defer for 3 months, which is for SME. So what does it mean by SME here? There are 2 criteria for you to fulfill. Number 1, your paid up capital has got to be 2.5 million ringgit and below. And the second criteria here is that your gross business income has got to be 50 million ringgit and below. So for those of you who are very familiar with the definition of SME under the Income Tax Act, you will notice that this one is slightly different. This one is less stringent. Under the Income Tax Act, for you to be an SME, in addition to these 2 criteria, you must not be related to any company having a paid up capital of more than 2.5 million. All right, so there's an added condition under the Income Tax Act. For this one here, it is less stringent, only 2 criteria. Then you'll be able to defer your tax installment payments. And the other good thing here is that this deferment is automatic, meaning no need to apply. Okay, so can we have the next slide, where we run through, these are some of the commonly asked questions by our clients. The first question here is on, can SMEs submit application for 3rd month revision, even though the 3rd month is not due for payment yet? So example, this company has got a financial year ending 31st March 2021. So can they submit the application now? Now meaning April. The answer is no. Why? Because for this year end, 31st March 2021, the 3rd installment month falls on July. So then they will need to submit, they can only submit in the month of July, okay? The second and third question here is quite the same. They are asking, how would the Inland Revenue Board determine whether a company has fulfilled the SME conditions, right? Because we are saying the deferment is automatic, right? So what we understand from the Inland Revenue Board is that they have the records, they have your company records, which is your tax return, right? So they are looking at your 2018 tax returns, where they can see your paid up capital as well as your gross business income. So if you fulfill that criteria, then we understand that an email will be sent to you to inform you, to notify you that you do qualify for the deferment. Okay, for those companies that have submitted their 2019 tax returns, meaning you have a very early year end, for example, January 2019 year end, right? You would have submitted by now, you've submitted your tax return. And if let's say your gross business income is more than 50 million, but in 2018 tax returns, your gross business income is less than 50 million. The question here is, do you fall under SME or not? For this part here, it's not clear yet. We understand that the Inland Revenue is tidying up their records now. So I don't think so far, no companies has received any notification. If you have not received any notification, I think it is good for you to go and check with the Inland Revenue Board, all right? Now I'll move on to the fourth question here. Would the 3 and 6 months installment payment deferment be due for payment in the immediate following month, i.e. after expiry of the relevant 3 and 6 month installment deferment period? So the question here is that, so if you get to enjoy that benefit, so for example, 3 months, right? So April, May, June, you do not need to pay. The question here is that, do I need to pay everything, the 3 months in July or not? Yeah, that's the question here. The answer is no. So the word deferment here is a little bit confusing. Yeah. So you do not need to pay the 3 months in July, right? You just continue to pay your July, August, and so on, your month, the monthly installments. When you file your tax returns at the end of the day, you just compare your actual tax versus your estimate, and you just pay the balance. So in this case here, there will not be any penalty for underestimation as well. Okay, can we move on to the next slide, please? This is on tax filing return, filing of your tax returns. So there is a extension of time given for companies having accounting period ending 31st July 2019 to 31st December 2019. So you are given a 2 months deferral. Okay, so example, if you are December year end, right? A lot of companies have December year end. So your statutory deadline, you actually need to submit by July this year. But now you are given 2 months, then you only need to, the deadline now is shifted to September 2020. The other column there, which is the company with a January year end, right? So there's no 2 months extension, but there is a 1 month extension, right? So it's up to 30th September 2020 as well. Next slide, please. Okay, withholding tax. So it's another extension of time again. Withholding tax here, withholding tax in the first place, I need to explain a little bit here. It applies on certain payments made to non-residents. What kind of payments? For example, royalty, interest, or technical fees for technical services rendered in Malaysia. Now, what is the deadline? The deadline to pay this withholding tax would be within 1 month from the date you pay the non-resident, or from the date of crediting or contra payment. So example here, if you make a payment for royalty, for example, to a foreign company on 19 February 2020, then the deadline to pay the withholding tax to the Inland Revenue Board would be by 18 March 2020. But because 18 March 2020 is within the MCO period, then you have time until 31st May 2020 to remit the withholding tax to IRB. But if your withholding tax is due on, let's say, 29 April 2020, which is 1 day after the MCO period, then in this case, very sorry, no extension at the moment. You have to quickly pay the withholding tax on that day itself when your office reopens. Otherwise, there's going to be a 10% penalty on the unpaid withholding tax. All right, can we have the next slide? Okay, this is again another extension of time for you to pay your tax installment payments as well as monthly tax deductions. So for those of you that cannot qualify for the deferment of the 3 months tax installments, right? So if your tax installments payments are due in April and May installments, which is due on 15 April as well as 15 May respectively, now this is extended to 31st May 2020. The same applies to the monthly tax deduction on the salaries paid to your employees. You need to deduct a portion of the tax, right? For March and April salaries, which is due on 15 April and 15 May, now it is extended to 31st May 2020. Okay, then the one on the right is the sales and service tax returns. If the deadline is falling on 31st March 2020 and 30th April 2020, it has been extended to 12th May. I don't know why 12th May is a little bit odd that day. But customs is giving that deadline. Next slide, please. Okay, this is on tax deductions and capital allowances. There are 4 measures here. I will touch on the tax deduction on COVID-19 contribution. This is to encourage people to contribute for COVID-19. So if you have a contribution in cash or in kind, for example, PPE, ventilators, consumables, you will get a tax deduction for the amount that you have contributed. Criteria here is that the contribution must go to government, private hospitals, government department or agencies, as well as registered NGOs without profit or political motive. You have to remember this. In order for you to get the tax deduction, you need to obtain a letter of acknowledgement from the recipient. So there will be a form. If you go to the guidelines published by the Ministry of Finance, there is a Lampiran 1 or Appendix 1, we call it, that you need to get the recipient to acknowledge it. And then you get this form and apply to the Ministry of Finance for approval. Without the approval, you will not be able to get the tax deduction. Okay, remember to do that. Now, the other 3 measures here, I will pass over to my colleague, Li Jin, who will take over from here. Over to you, Li Jin.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I'll continue from here. So the next one that we'll talk about is the tax deduction on renovation and refurbishment of business premise. Now, generally for renovation costs, it will not be given tax deduction neither in the form of revenue deduction nor in the form of capital allowances. So if you incurred renovation costs, generally it's not deductible unless it is in relation to furniture and fittings and some other movable partition that you can claim a deduction under capital allowances. So for this particular period, from 1st March 2020 to 31st December 2020, if you have incurred any renovation costs, you can actually claim a deduction up to 300,000 ringgit. Okay. The other measure introduced is the accelerated capital allowances on machinery and equipment. So the general capital allowance rate for machinery and equipment is 20% initial allowance and about 10% annual allowance. So for equipment and machinery that purchased during the period or expenses incurred during the period from 1st March 2020 to 31st December 2020, and accelerated capital allowances will be given, and the rate will be initial allowance of 20%, same, but an annual allowance of 40% will be given. So generally, the cost incurred, you can claim it over a period of 2 years. The third thing, which we receive a lot of question, is in relation to tax deduction on the reduction or waiver of rental. So if a landlord who reduced the tenant rental by an amount of equivalent to at least 30%, then given from the month of April to June 2020, then the landlord can enjoy a tax deduction on the discount of rental given to the tenant. Now, one of the condition is that the tenant must be SME, and it is only given for business premises only. Next slide, please. So what is the definition of SME for the purpose of claiming a rental deduction? So like Kwang Gai has mentioned that under the Income Tax Act, the definition of SME is 2.5 million paid up capital, turnover of not more than 50 million, and you must not be related to another company with turnover of more than 2.5 million. But for the purpose of claiming a tax deduction on the rental waive, the SME definition is actually different. So if your company have annual turnover of less than 300,000 or with number of employee which is less than 5 people, then basically you are considered a micro company that qualify for tax deduction. If you are a service company with annual turnover of between 300,000 but less than 3 million, or if the number of employee is between 5 but less than 30, then you are considered a small company. And the definition of a medium company is for services industry is annual turnover of between 3 million but less than 20 million, or a company having employee between 30 people but less than 75 people. So note that there are different definitions for manufacturing company, but understand that most of the participants here are actually in the service sector. Next slide. So some of the questions that we received in relation to the ACA and tax deduction on rental wage, we are going to address a few here. So one of the questions asked on the accelerated capital allowances is accelerated capital allowances on machinery and equipment is that what is the definition of incurred for the claiming for the purpose of claiming ACA? So does it mean that I merely need to purchase the equipment during the period? Is that good enough? Now, for the purpose of claiming this ACA, if you purchase the equipment during the period, but the equipment has not been used between the period 1st March 2020 to 31st December 2020, you do not qualify for this ACA. The definition of incurred for the purpose of ACA is that you need to purchase and the equipment must be in use during this period. And equipment includes all the computer and IT equipment as well. Yeah. Now, question in relation to rental rate. Now, the first question is that from the perspective of landlord, that means the rental income receiver. With regards to tax deduction for amount of rental rate or reduced, it is applicable to SME or all company. Is it applicable to sole proprietor, partnership, and individual taxpayer? So the condition to enjoy this rental wage deduction is that the tenant must be SME. As far as the landlord is concerned, you can be either a company, a sole proprietor, partnership, or individual taxpayer. Means that it applies to all right, so long as you rent it to a SME. Okay. Second question. The rental amount refers to the rental stated in the tenancy agreement or actual rental received. So for example, if your rental agreement states that the tenant will be given a 2,000 discount for its first year rental. So for example, your original rental is 10,000, but you are given a 2,000 discount. So your first year rental income received is actually 8,000 per month. Okay. Will the 30% rental reduction in rental calculation, is it calculated based on the original rental of 10,000 or the discounted amount of 8,000? So based on our confirmation obtained from Inland Revenue Board, the 30% reduction should be calculated based on the 8,000 rental received, because that is the amount that you're supposed to receive in pursuant to the tenancy agreement that you have signed, right? The third question, if 50% rental rebate equivalent to 20,000 per month is given for the month of March and April 2020 respectively, will the landlord be entitled for tax deduction totally 40,000? Is there a cap? So just now we mentioned that the rental deduction is only qualified for the month of April to June. So in this case, the discount is given in the month of March and April. Hence, deduction given in the month of March will not qualify for deduction, but the rental deduction given in the month of April, since it is more than 30%, so the full deduction of 20,000 given in the month of April will qualify for tax deduction. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the next slide is in relation to wage subsidy program that was announced in the latest stimulus package. Okay, so based on the latest announced wage subsidy program, the wage subsidy will be given to a company actually it is given to all companies, but the amount of subsidy given to each employee per month will depend on the number of employees the company has. So for example, the first category, if your company have 75 employees and below, then the amount that qualify for the subsidy will be 1,002 per month per employee. If your company has employee between 75 people to 200 people, then basically you are given 800 per month per employee subsidy. And for companies that have got more than 200 employees, then you are entitled for 600 per month subsidy, but restricted to only 200 employees. Okay, the subsidy period will be for 3 months, right? And the condition is that if your company has employee of 75 people and above, you need to justify that there's a 50% decline in of revenue since January 2020 onwards. Okay, and your employee that entitled for this subsidy must not earn more than 4,000 per month, and you are required to maintain this employee for a period of 6 months. That means 3 months during the subsidy period and 3 months thereafter. In terms of application, you can actually submit your application up to 15 September 2020. And once it is approved, the money will be then credited to the employer account within 7 to 14 days from the date of approval. One thing to remind the company is that the subsidy is only given to Malaysian employees. So foreign worker and expatriate will not be eligible for this subsidy. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. So again, a few questions that we have received. Okay. First question is that will the subsidy received from the wage subsidy program be taxable on the employer? The answer is no. All grants and subsidy received from the government is tax exempt. Okay. Now, second question is that how to calculate the 50% drop in revenue for company with 75 employees and with company that is more than 75 employees. Do you compare the total revenue from January 2019 to March 2019 with January 2020 to March 2020, or you should compare the total revenue of January 2020 with March 2020 on month by month basis? So what we understand from Bergeso is that in from the month of 1st January 2020 to until to date, so you've already got the number till March. So you take these 3 months and you take the highest revenue in this 3 months and the lowest revenue in one of the months, and you make a comparison. If any of the month have can show that there's a 50% drop in revenue, then basically you are entitled for this subsidy. You can apply. All right. Now the third question. I have an employee starting 1st Jan 2020, and I have already registered the employee under my company. Somehow the SOCSO and EIS contribution for this employee was omitted. Will the employee still qualify for the deduction? Now the answer is that if your employee has already start working with effect from 1st Jan 2020, and the company, meaning the employer, has already been registered with SOCSO before 1st April 2020, then you will be entitled. But you now have to register this employee and contribute whatever month that you have omitted to contribute, then only you can make the application. Okay. Question number 4. Our company has 200 employees. Our sales forecast for the month of April 2020 show that there will be a reduction of 50% against the previous month. May I apply? Now, in order to apply, you got to use the actual sales number. So a forecast sales number cannot be used in your application. Okay. Number 5, if we choose not to apply for the wage subsidy, can we negotiate for pay cut and unpaid leave with our employees? Now, the answer is yes, subject to whatever labor law requirement in Malaysia. So only if the employee is being subsidized, you are not allowed to have to ask them to go for unpaid leave or to negotiate for pay cut. If the subsidy is not if the employee doesn't enjoy the subsidy, then basically you can negotiate for a pay cut and unpaid leave subject to the Malaysian employment law. Number 6, one of the conditions is that eligible employee under the WIT subsidy program must retain their employee for at least 6 months. Does it apply to only those employees where we receive subsidy to all employees in the company? Now, it is only applicable to those employees that you receive subsidy. Okay. The last question, the subsidy is only applicable to employee earning 4,000 salary per month. Does the 4,000 salary includes commission and allowances? So based on the latest Q&A issued by SOXO, it should include commissions and allowances. Okay, next. Okay, so this is all we have. I'll now pass it back to Mr. Hugh.
Thank you, Team Deloitte. There are a lot of questions that has already come in regards to the tax portion and the wage subsidy portion. We'll address that once we move on to the Q&A session later. Now I'd like to bring on Caesar, who actually focus on the stimulus, if the stimulus has any impact on the labor law, because there have been a lot of questions on the labor law part and how this is linked to the stimulus. So we'll pass the floor over to Caesar.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Basically, what I'm going to try and do is to just touch very broadly on the labor law as far as it affects employers and employees under the recent MCO regulations. I think one of the confusions, or rather there was a lot of confusion that arose out of the guidelines that were issued by the HR Ministry and also by SOXO. I think what it was trying to do was basically provide some guidance. But I think in the course of doing that, because of perhaps not using the right language or not qualifying some of the statements that were made, there was actually a lot of misreading of the position, particularly the legal rights of employers and employees. I think it's fair to say that as a general rule, neither employer or employee can amend the terms of an existing employment contract as it stands. So, for instance, if the guidelines seem to suggest that it is not possible for an employer to ask an employee to go on leave without pay, might appear to be a very, very rigid position. And in actual fact, that is not entirely true. The law obviously allows both parties to come together and agree on a position that is acceptable to both of them. So if a scenario was presented, for instance, to an employee, whereby the employer said that because of certain financial difficulties or because of the MCO, there might be insufficient work for that particular employee to continue with his job, there's obviously open for both parties to either agree a reduction in the employee's salary or possibly a temporary layoff whereby the employee receives no salary. And also the consent of the parties to make those variations may already be contained in the existing terms of their employment contracts. So if the right is already given to an employer, for instance, to require an employee to go on leave, that right may be exercised by the employer without any problems. I think the main thing to really understand about the labor law in relation to the FAQs and the guidance that was issued by the government is that those FAQs and guidance don't change the law. They are not gazetted as legislation, and therefore the labor law continues to be what it is before those FAQs were issued. I think without actually moving to specifics at this point, just as a general principle for both employers and employees, I think the main thing to remember that is that in good labor relations, the main principle is that both parties should act in good faith, fairness, and to ensure that in whatever action is taken by the employer, that their due process is actually followed. Yeah, I'm happy to take some of the questions as and when they arise, but I think for the moment I'll leave my statements to that.
Thank you, Caesar. So we will move into the Q&A session. There are a lot of questions that has been coming in. What we'll do in terms of format is we will allow the panelists to take turns in terms of responding to some of the questions that's been posed. We'll start with Ms. Sim. Each panelist will be given a chance to reply or answer to 3 questions. Yeah. So Ms. Sim. Ms. Sim, you need to unmute yourself.
So sorry about that. Yeah. Okay, there are 19 questions here. So I will, the first question, are we talking here about 50 million income in bracket profit or revenue? So let me click answer live so that everybody can see that question. So here, okay, this question is referring to I think the deferment of the tax installment payments, right? So 50 million gross business income. So we are talking about revenue. We are not talking about profit, okay? Okay, next, let me see those that are relevant. Question here on any specific incentives for MSC status companies. I don't recall any, yeah, because most of you can fall under the SME criteria for deferment of tax installments. And then if you, whether you're MSC or non-MSC, you can qualify for the revision of tax estimates. Yeah. This one very interesting here, the third one, yeah. Okay. Is the letter from MOF still required if the donation has a receipt issued by from example Mercy Malaysia? Okay, I know why you're asking this question. So the one where I said there's a that's a special tax deduction for COVID-19 contribution. So that tax deduction is a facility under Section 34(6) of the Income Tax Act. The other one that you're referring to is under Section 44(6) is separate. So if you will notice that if you qualify for those donation under 44(6), there is a cap there. It is capped to 10% of your aggregate income. So for those under 44(6), if you have a receipt from Mercy Malaysia in this example here, then yes, you can get a deduction. You don't need to apply from MOF, all right? But do take note, there is a 10% cap on your aggregate income, okay? But the other one where you need to apply from the Ministry of Finance, that one there's no cap at all. Okay, so it's a different tax deduction under different sections of the Income Tax Act. Okay, over to you, Hugh.
Thanks, Ms. Sim. I think I just want to reinforce what Ms. Sim had mentioned in regards to the question on any specific incentive for MSC status company from this particular stimulus. I think Ms. Sim's answer is based on category of company, in this case, which is more for SMEs, not status of company. So MSC status company, as long as you fall within the SME category, then you're entitled to some of this incentive or stimulus that has been announced. Yeah. So of course, next is Ms. Tam. Ms. Tam, I think you need to unmute.
Yeah, a few questions here. The first one is yeah, okay. So the first one I will answer is regards to rental deduction. So the question is that in regards to rental deduction, in order to obtain this waive of minimum 30% tax deduction, must the deduction be given for the period from April to June? That's mean 3 months, or it can be on a monthly basis. Example, for April, where the total shutdown due to MCO. So the answer is that it could be on a monthly basis. So between April to June, if you give a rental deduction in any of this month, that means you can only give for 1 month. And if the reduction is 30% or more, then you can qualify for a tax deduction. Okay. Okay. The second question, okay, I will look at is the employee's requirement for the purpose of claiming wage subsidy. So the question is that if my company has more than 75 employees, but 50% are foreigner, which are not eligible, do we still have to meet the revenue decline criteria? The answer is generally yes. If those foreigner is included in your payroll, so in determining the number of employees, you will include the foreigner as well. So if the total employees is more than 75, then you got to meet the 50% decline in revenue requirement. Okay. Back to you.
Okay. Caesar, your turn.
Yeah, sorry. There are quite a few questions, some quite practical in nature. I'll try and answer one live. It says, currently most of the employees are implementing working from home. Would it be possible to keep postponing the joining date of the new staff? I think there are two issues here. When you refer to joining date, I think what you need, or what needs to be clarified, is whether that is the physical joining date, or is that the date on which the employment contract commences. So again, not actually seeing how the employment terms have been written. If, for instance, the parties have already agreed to a fixed joining date, then regardless of where that employee may be, either working from home or working in the office, as would be the normal situation, his employment contract is already running. So from that point in time, the employer is then under an obligation to ensure that he fulfills whatever he has agreed in the employment contract with that particular employee. So in that sense, that employee is no different from any of his other existing employees, and has to work in accordance with the policies of the company at that particular point in time under the MCO restrictions. Let me just try another question here. There's one here which relates to expats, which is a little bit unusual. The question says, would it be possible to not to renew expats employment passes and terminate them due to the current situation? Again, I think we need to come back to the fundamental principle of law. If there is already an existing contract, and in this case, if you have already engaged that expatriate and there's an agreement specifically for him to work for a fixed duration, the law does not change that contract. The MCO regulations do not change the terms of that contract. The terms of the contract will decide what rights you have in relation to that expat. If there's a right of termination, for instance, because the MCO or pandemic is identified, for instance, as a force majeure, which allows you to terminate his employment, then yes, of course, you can. But if it is silent on that, then the assumption is that the contract continues to apply and has force. So if you would then say that because of the MCO, and if you don't have any other acceptable ground under labor law to terminate his contract, the obligation would still continue for you to apply for any other passes that may be that may be necessary for him to continue working in Malaysia. Back to you, Hugh.
Okay, thanks, Caesar. By the way, we noticed that a lot of questions are being posed in the chat function. can the attendees key in the question in the Q&A function, which is just 2 tabs away to the right of the chat function, so that we can track those questions easier? Because we have to refer to both the Q&A function as well as the chat function in this case. Yeah. So back to Ms. Sim.
Okay, Mr. Hugh. I'm like screaming through the questions. A lot of it is on employees. Okay, this one here asking about the accelerated capital allowance. Does it include laptop or not, right? Because in the speech given by the Prime Minister, it says there on machinery and equipment. Yeah, the question here is whether laptop falls under equipment. It is silent. The speech doesn't say anything, but to my view, I think it does. Laptop should come under equipment. Laptop is, as long as it is used for your business, it should come under the meaning of equipment. I believe after this, there will be a gazette order issued to make it clearer what it means by machinery and equipment. So that I have answered. There is one on. Hang on.
Yeah, I think, Ms. Sim, to help you out, there is a question, drop in 50% revenue. Do we look at total company revenue, or can we look at project specific?
That is on the wage subsidy, right?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah,
So
yeah,
we'll leave it to Legion to answer that
yeah,
then.
okay. Okay, this one here. Regarding tax deduction on COVID-19, is it applicable for individuals or organizations as well? If applicable, how do they avail? So like I said just now, there are 2 types of deductions, right? You either go for the Section 34(6), which means that you need to apply to the Ministry of Finance. So there is a form, get the recipient to acknowledge it, submit to Ministry of Finance, and then you'll be able to get the deduction. No cap on that. If you go for the 44(6) one, which is the usual, the deduction that you pay, let's say, to the National Kidney Foundation or Mercy Malaysia for that matter, that one no need to go to Ministry of Finance. Usually, this kind of organization will give you a receipt. With that receipt, you'll be able to get a deduction. The thing is that it is capped to 10% of your aggregate income, right? Maybe Hugh, you can pass it to Lijin. She can answer the 50% reduction.
Yeah, Lijin, there seems to be a lot of questions on the revenue measurement. Perhaps you may want to run through it again. There are a few scenarios, whether it goes by project versus total revenue, or how do you compare it month by month in that sense? So you may want to start with that first.
Okay. So when we look at the revenue, you look at the whole company. You don't go on by project basis. So you got to compare the total revenue of the company during those months. Okay, like I said, month by month. So the confirmation that we have obtained from SOXO or Percoso is that from the month of January to March, you take the highest and you compare with the lowest. And if that exceeds 50%, then you can apply. So somewhere here just now, I saw one question is that they ask if, let's say, in the month of February compared with January, I qualify for 50%, but somehow come to the month of March, the revenue drop is only 20%. So can I still apply? So based on the inquiry that we made to SOXO, they say that you can still apply, right? So the second question that I think I would like to address is that would foreign company will also be eligible for the wage subsidy? So the answer is yes. Okay. So foreign company can also apply. You only look at how many employees you have, you fall under which category, and you apply accordingly. Okay. The other question that maybe I can also answer is that the question here is that you have got 70 employees and 50 of them are eligible for wage subsidy. Can you choose to apply the wage subsidy for only 25, and for the remaining 25, you choose to negotiate pay cut or ask them to go on the no pay leave? The answer is yes. Okay. If you apply only 25 and you got it, So it's only the 25 you cannot ask them to go for pay cut, or you cannot negotiate for to ask them to go for no pay leave. But of course, bear in mind the employment law requirement. Okay, back to you, Hugh.
One quick question before we go over to Caesar is what's the definition of employees? Does it include contract staff?
Okay, just now, one of the question asked, does it include foreigner? The answer is yes. Does it include contract staff? So the answer that the verbal confirmation that we have obtained so far is that if this person is in your payroll, okay, that means you deduct your PCB for them, okay, you also take care of all their employee obligation as their employer, then basically they will be counted as your employee. So it all depends on whether they fall within your payroll or out of your payroll.
Okay, thank you. Caesar?
Okay, there's a question here from Nurul Fadila. She wants to know, is it possible for employer to take out the fixed allowance for petrol during this MCO? Try and answer that very quickly. I think, Nurul, the answer to that is very much a question of what's written in your employment contract with this particular employee. It has nothing to do with the effect of the MCO. If that employee if the employer has agreed to pay that allowance regardless of actual consumption of petrol, because you mentioned the term fixed allowance, then you have to pay it because the contract did not make it a condition that you actually have to consume petrol to be paid that allowance. So again, it depends on how you've worded the entitlement under your employment contract. Let me just try and take this other question from Wu Pei Yi. I'll try and take this live. It says, if the staff doesn't agree with the pay cut or unpaid leave, what are the next steps for the employer? Well, I think the employer really then has to make a decision whether or not it is still prepared to keep this employee in employment. But obviously, if it wants to exercise its rights of retrenchment based on the principles of labor law, which is that if the business is suffering from financial difficulty or there is an excess of labor over the available work in the business, then of course you can exercise your right of retrenchment. So if this is one of the situations that you're faced with and the employee has not agreed to accept a pay cut or to go on unpaid leave, then you would have to decide whether it is necessary for you to keep the employee in employment with your business. I think very quickly, I think there was just one which I can answer also. This one basically says, is it allowable under the law for an employer to renegotiate the employee's pay even after the wage subsidy is given? Now, the wage subsidy is one matter and the renegotiation of the employee's contract is another matter. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think my other panelists will probably be able to advise on this. The wage subsidy actually anticipates that there will be no reduction or change in the pay that the eligible employee will be receiving. So if you actually reduce the employee's wage, then I would take it that the way that the guidelines are written, you would then disqualify yourself from that subsidy for that particular employee. Now, again, it's a question of when would you want to renegotiate this subsidy? I'm assuming that if you already have the wage subsidy and you're receiving it, and then you decide to reduce the salary some more, you're then in a unusual situation whereby you're receiving benefit from one side and at the same time you're asking the employee to take a further pay cut on his salary. I'm not sure how you intend to work that one out logically with the employee. Over back to you, Hugh.
Yeah, Caesar, one more question. I'm reading it out loud. I think this is related to your area from Jenny Kogilavani. Question is, our clients are terminating contract without serving notice period simply due to the current situation. And as a vendor, we are not able to challenge them. Seeking your advice on this. Caesar, you are muted. You need to unmute.
Okay, I'm assuming that these are not necessarily employment contracts, but they are part of your business contracts, right? Now, if that is the case, again, you know, we come back to Contract Law 101. What does your contract provide? If notice is required, then obviously you have to abide by the terms of your contract. Yeah. The MCO only has an impact on that if you can show that it is not possible to perform that contract by virtue of what in law is known as a frustration. But for that to arise, you must actually show that it was impossible for you to move forward with your obligations, and therefore not possible to serve out the full notice period. But if you cannot show that, and if you are just saying, oh, because there's this new regulation, I don't need to serve notice, I'm sorry, that doesn't come in at all. You still need to observe the obligations under the terms of the contract.
Okay, thanks, Caesar. I'm mindful of time that we only have a few minutes left, but yet there are still a lot of questions. I think we'll go one more round, the panelists, to answer a few more questions. Can we start with you, Ms. Sim?
Okay, I'll take one question here. Again, on COVID-19 contribution, it says the MDEC is collecting COVID-19 relief fund. Does that qualify for tax deduction for both individuals and organizations? MDEC is a government agency, right? So it should qualify. Like I said, important thing is, in this case, you have to, you know, print out that lampiran one and get someone in MDEC to acknowledge it, and then you submit it to the MOF to get the deduction. The question here asks for, is it both individuals and organizations? Yes, it does. Condition here is that, I think, provided you have a business income, right? If you have a business income, then you get deduction under 34(6). So individuals who do not have business income, then you go for the 44(6) deduction, which in that scenario, then you do not need to go to the MOF. You just need to get that receipt. You get a deduction from your aggregate income, but be mindful that there is a 10% cap there, right?
If I can add on to that, if I understand the question correctly, referring to donation drive that MDEC is running right now, the donation is actually to be donated directly to Imaret, not to MDEC itself. We are not receiving any funds on behalf of any organization or on behalf of the government in that sense. Yeah. Li Jun, any question that you'd like to address for the final round?
Yeah, I would like to address the non-wage subsidy question. One question asks us that, is there any additional waiver like HRDF contributions for service industry? Okay, so HRDF contribution is waived for 6 months. So those for the month of from March to August. So that means March contribution due in April and August contribution due in September. So those 6-month HRDF contribution will be waived. Okay. The other thing is that there was one question in relation to retrenched employee. That means if it's unemployed, what can they do about it? As we did not cover it here, is that the retrenched employee can actually apply to Bergeso to actually get 80% of his salary being subsidized for the period of 6 months, and then subsequently will be reduced to 30% of his salary, provided that the employee before the retrenchment is a contributor to SOCSO as well. So those are two that is not in relation to wage subsidy, but still they can get some benefit out of it.
Okay, thanks, Li Jun. Yes.
Mr. Hugh, there's one question here, maybe just quickly to address here.
Sure.
The tax deduction on rental. will it be a double deduction or single deduction? So the answer very easy, single deduction, no double deduction, okay?
Okay, thank you. Caesar, final round from you.
Yeah, I'm just trying to go through this to see, because some of it are just the same questions asked a different way around. But maybe just as a final roundup, there's one here which just says that if consent is required, it seems like a unilateral notice to staff. Please help us with the reasons a consent is needed or compulsory. The issue is very simple here. Basically, if there is no provision in the contract with a particular employee to reduce or alter his remuneration, you are bound by the contract. So the only way you can move away from that obligation is if the employee agrees to a lower pay or a waiver of his pay. You cannot impose it unilaterally. But I think maybe where this is coming from is maybe where you have many employees in the same category and you are wondering whether you should approach them individually. I think you probably have no choice. Obviously, it may be possible to send one notification to all of them at the same time, but technically speaking, each one of them must come back to you on their own separately and agree to the unpaid leave or the reduction in their salary. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you, Caesar. I also noticed that there are a lot of questions pertaining to the expat pass that are being processed by MDEC. I would suggest for the attendees who have questions on this to either call us or write to us directly so that we can actually provide a response to that accordingly. Yeah. With that, unfortunately, we have run out of time, although there are still a lot of questions unanswered. I see that there are 70 over questions. While we feel bad about that, unfortunately, we're constrained by time. I would like to say thank you to all the three panelists, Ms. Sim, Ms. Tam, and Caesar or Mr. Long in this case. And with that, we'll end the session. Thank you so much again. Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay. Shafiq, have we finished?